This is ordinance number 1834, a map amendment number 843, an ordinance to approve map amendment application number 843 for rezoning of the property known as the Reese Young property located at 7003 Van Dusen Road, Laurel, Maryland, consisting of 13.134 acres identified as Lot 1 and 2, tax parcel 13, by Chester A. Dailey Jr., Melissa M. Reese, and Charles C. Young, located at the intersection of Van Dusen Road and Contee Road, for the placement in the MXT zone with the Conceptual Development Plan as required in Section 20-12 MXT zone of the City of Laurel Unified Land Development Code. Ms. Pulley. How are you? Doing well.
Good evening, everybody. What you have before you is an ordinance number 1834 for map amendment approval, also with conceptual approval for property known as the Reese Young property, lots 1 and 2 and tax parcel 13. The property was annexed into the city in 2008 and placed in the R5 zone. However, they would like to have the MXT zoning designation. They weren't able to have the MXT zone classification when they were annexed in due to a state legislation that requires a 5-year hold. Since that hold is expired, they now would like to proceed with getting that approval. Also, they're looking to get the concept plan approval for possibly 100 units for assisted living facility. If this application or ordinance is approved, they would need to get a special exception for the assisted living facility and final MXT approval by the Planning Commission.
Thank you. Mr. Les.
I'm fine with this.
Ms. Crary.
I'm fine.
Ms. Nicholas.
Can you tell me you mentioned the assistant living facility,
Yes, ma'am.
and where would that be located?
It would be, part of it would be on lot 1 and 2 for the property.
Okay, I'll ask you questions later. Thank you.
I have no questions either. I reviewed it, and thank you very much for being here. We'll take this up at our meeting that it will take place on March the 9th at 7 p.m. here in the council chambers. Thank you very much for coming. Ordinance number 1835, an ordinance to amend the operating budget of the mayor and city council of Laurel for the fiscal year of July 1st of 2014 through June the 30th of 2015. Ms. Saylor.
Mr. President, this ordinance provides some adjustments to the operating budget. The first being the addition of $88,000 of unanticipated highway user revenue, which is being added to that revenue source, and an offsetting addition to the snow and ice removal budget. Additionally, red light camera processing fees have exceeded the budget due to additional offsetting revenues. The program for the retention incentives for professional employees and specialty pay at the police department requires a transfer. The life safety review expenses in the Department of Community Planning and Business Services has exceeded that budget, but it has offsetting revenues as well, so those would be adjusted. The Laurel Police Department has used state-awarded seized currency to purchase personal wear cameras. The use of those funds is required to be reflected in the general operating budget, so there are offsetting revenues and expenditures. The financial activities of the Laurel 4th of July Committee are to be reflected in the general operating budget, so there's currently a $25,000 adjustment to reflect those expenditures for the deposit on the fireworks, some other deposits that were made for fundraisers. There was a transfer made from the Department of Public Works as well as the Department of Emergency Services Management to the Department of Information Technology for the purchase of iPads. This ordinance also reflects a transfer from property insurance deductibles to the Information Technology Department for the replacement of a mobile computer. And a necessary transfer is being made from the operating expenditures in the Department of Communications to the compensation budget to add to that budget for additional auxiliary staff that was used during the renovations to this building, as well as the illness of a full-time employee, filling in for that employee. So overall is an addition of $363,685 for a total budget of $28,700,927.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Saylor. We'll go ahead and start with Ms. Nicholas. Questions?
No questions.
Ms. Query?
Thank you, Mr. President. The $162,000 on the police department, that's coming from the state?
The adjustment to that budget is for the use of seized currency as well as the red light camera ticket revenue.
Okay. I have no further questions at this time.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Les?
Thank you, Mr. President. So Michelle, part of that will be restricted in where we spend it in the police department, correct?
The seized currency
Yes.
has to be
That's-
used for equipment purchases
Right.
for investigative purposes.
I just want to make sure we're clear on that. Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. President.
Thank you. Mr. Smalls, good evening.
Thank you, Mr. President. I apologize for being late. I have no questions.
Okay, thank you, and I have none either. Thank you, Ms. Saylor. You want to go ahead and move on into ordinance number 1836, an ordinance to amend certain project budgets in the FY 15 to 20 capital improvements program.
Yes, sir. In ordinance 1831, a project was introduced for the cable studio equipment replacement and set renovations project. This was funded by the PEG funding coming from the cable subscriptions designated for equipment purchases. After receipt of the bids for the 3 studio cameras to update the equipment, which is in excess of 20 years old, as well as preparing for the HD upgrade, more funds are needed. So the $31,490 is still for the cameras, but the lowest and best bid was $94,490.
Okay,
The other project is the citywide radio system, $25,000 from speed camera enforcement funds will be used to purchase additional citywide radios for public safety use.
okay, thank you. I'm going to start with Ms. Query.
Thank you, Mr. President. And this is just to add to, this is our in-house public safety radios, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yes, ma'am. This is to have spares and to provide for the new police vehicles.
And the equipment, is this all battery-operated equipment, and this is the only thing we probably have to replace on these every couple of years?
I'm sorry, and the radios?
No, I moved to the cameras, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, these are the studio cameras.
Studio
the
cameras.
cameras that stay in the studio,
Okay.
not the field cameers.
All right. And they have a lifespan of, do we know? Or
I'll defer
warranty?
to Ms. Barnes.
The warranty is for a minimum of 5 years.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, just to clarify, Councilmember Curry, these are being upgraded to go to HD. The current cameras are not HD capable, so we're going to HD.
Thank you.
Ms. Nicholas.
My question was answered about the warranty. Thank you.
Mr. Les.
Let me just, Kevin, Audrey, let me just clear up something in my mind. These are HD capable, but do we have to buy additional interface equipment for the HD for the cameras? Or is this the total cost of the HD camera?
This is just for the purchase of the cameras and interfaces that need to be in place just to operate the cameras. When we go HD, there is an additional step, some infrastructure that would have to be improved so that we can indeed broadcast HD.
Okay, Audrey, is that on the cameras or will that be in the studio part of the operation?
The additional step after this would be in the control room
Okay, all
back
right.
in the Laurel TV studio.
Okay. You've answered the question. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Smalls.
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess this question is for Ms. Barnes also. Timeline, in general timeline for being HD ready, A, and then B, programming. Currently, I think our programming is all pretty much standard definition. Do you have a program lineup in mind or that you're working on once you make the HD conversion that at least some of the programming will be in high definition?
We're ready to go HD right now.
Okay.
We just don't have the cameras or the infrastructure in place to do that. Once we get those cameras, everything will look instantly better. The next step is to get an actual HD line from Comcast so we can deliver the product to our viewers in HD. That should take 90 days after we make the request, once we get all of our cameras and infrastructure in place.
So all of our public meetings will be then broadcast in HD as well as other programming?
That's correct. And the cameras that we're purchasing can broadcast in standard definition now, and when we're ready to go to HD, those same cameras are HD ready. So there is no additional purchase there.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Mr. Smalls, what that means is you're going to look a hell of a lot better.
Is that possible?
Ms. Barnes, will we get anything in return for the old cameras that we have now?
I'm still in discussions with the administration about exactly what we want to do with those cameras, but we have started researching options to sell them. We've been on eBay and trying to see what the market will bear for cameras that are more than 12 years old. Some of the prices that we've seen so far are between $99 and $350. These cameras are way behind in technology, but there is a market for them, and so we're exploring those options. If that doesn't work out, we have an option to donate them to high schools, perhaps, community centers, things like that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the council? Well, I've got you, Ms. Barnes. Let me compliment you on, as we've talked this morning, on this particular document. I think it's well done, and we look forward to making that a part of our Welcome to Laurel program. Thank you. Okay, council, anything else on this topic? Seeing none, we'll have that hearing on March the 9th at 7 p.m. approximately. All right, Ms. Barnes, do you want to comment any further on the award of the contract?
I would like to say that we did do a competitive bid on this, and we got 3 bids from highly respected video integrators, and we are making a recommendation to award this contract to Contract Video Specialists. They are in Jessup, Maryland, and we've worked very closely with them over the years for Laurel TV, most recently on the installation of the digital equipment in this council chamber. So we're very familiar with their work and feel good about this recommendation to award them the bid for the cameras.
So that's in the amount of $94,490.
That's correct.
Okay, questions from the council? Ms. Nicholas?
I have no questions.
Ms. Curry?
I'm fine with this.
Mr. Les?
I'm fine,
Mr. Smalls?
No questions, Mr. President.
Thank you. At this time, we'll have an update on our snow budget from Mr. Freed. Mr. Freed, come forward, please.
Good evening. I believe up here on the screen, we've put together a little graph that has depicted the cost, or the actual, on these screen, it shows the man hours and the amount of salt we've done. The darker blue is the man hours, and a lighter blue is the amount of salt that we've used for these storms. This is the first 7, and the second screen would go through the next 7. To date, we've spent 1,076 man hours, and we've put down 1,818 tons of a combination of salt, calcium, and sand through these 14 storms. The next slide, or this one should be the breakdown of the expenditures by storms. The total expense for these storms with the man hours and everything else was $173,603. The cost for this does not reflect the fuel expense, which was a little over $8,000, which was taken out of these the snow account for salt and man hours. So what we've got to this date is we're I guess short $77,000 in our budget. We started with a little over $96,000, and we've surpassed that by $77,000. This does not include the few hours we spent last night here for the storm that we had, and it doesn't include what could possibly take place tomorrow, and hopefully by next week this will all be said and done. Our salt dome is relatively getting way down in supplies, and I would assume that we would be looking for enough monies to fill the salt dome back up so that we're not starting out next year in a deficit.
Okay.
Mayor, Rob, why don't you talk just briefly, so I know council does, maybe just the general public that may be watching. Although sometimes early we do treating of streets, which costs us salt, which costs us staffing hours, and then it's 40 degrees, by noontime. I mean, that really takes a hit on our operating budget and our staff. Any comment? We've had several of those as well.
These ice storms that we've had, where they've started out as a mixture of sleet, freezing rain, or snow. You're right, we pre-treat all the roads in Laurel so that the ice does not stick to the pavements. So in doing that, we mix a lot of calcium and sand in there for traction, which is very costly. And then during the duration of these type storms, we are constantly reapplying the same salt mixture so that the town is everybody can get around and be safe. So yes, a lot of time is spent and a lot of money on those types of storms. In past years where you can plow the snow off and then treat it with salt, it's a whole lot cheaper, but these ones we've had this year have just been very expensive.
Thank you, sir. Any questions from the council, Mayor?
Just, I appreciate Michelle and Rob and others putting their heads together to find the funding to balance the budget. First off, make sure we're making, the last storm we were 50,000 in the hole. So the movement of 88,000 will take care of that, as well as hopefully this next storm that's coming. So, and then not in this expenditures is also people like the facilities out of Park and Recs that take care of the sidewalk and all those facilities. I think, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, you said it's about $2,500 that it's we've got to try to absorb. Again, when you're talking about a department that size, all those funds start to take its toll. And then if we open up the EOC and the other things that go on, off hours, staff in some cases gets overtime or in other cases gets comp time. So there's a lot's been happening, and we wanted to make sure we got this to you all so you understood, and more importantly, the general public on what's taking place here and will take place here this evening or tomorrow morning early.
Well, I think that's another thing to keep in mind, and that is that when we project how long a vehicle or a certain vehicle will last, certainly the wear and tear that these types of storms bring to us and cause us to use those equipment causes us to replace them a lot sooner than we normally would.
That's correct. A lot of the plows and things of that nature we've had to do repairs on.
I always like the fact that you're better than the weatherman. What are you predicting for tonight?
Actually, I look for about 5 to 8 inches of a heavy wet snow starting probably pretty early in the morning and being pretty heavy through rush hour.
Okay. Have your people be safe. Any other questions from the council?
Mr. President,
Yes.
I do have, I think, more of a comment than a question. I was taking a look while you were talking at our website, and I see there's snow emergency information there, which I think is an excellent thing to do. And I know it's been there for years, but just as a reminder, I was curious, Ms. Barnes, if any of the snow emergency information, snow removal information is on the bulletin board on our TV channel. Is that?
We right now are in the process of posting all of that information. We're making robocalls as we speak. We are putting it up on Laurel TV. I've already put it on Twitter. I put it on at Laurel PIO Twitter and at City of Laurel Twitter. So we have a whole process of notifications involving like 7 different platforms.
Okay. To answer your question, I mean, we have declared a snow emergency go into effect at 11 p.m. tonight, which gives people enough time to move their vehicles off snow emergency routes. So if you're parked on the even side of the streets, you want to remove those cars. If you don't, we'll attempt to notify you, but come early morning, if they're in our way, police department will tow the vehicles. You'll be ticketed and be responsible for those. It is a lot simpler for people to move their cars. We would prefer that. Because when it starts snowing out there, those individuals that may not have been out there at 2 or 3, 4 o'clock in the morning to see what the plows have to deal with would be very surprised as snow starts falling on the things that they're dealing with. So we did the snow emergency snow emergency plan for 11 p.m. Tonight, and we're asking everybody to move their vehicles off snow emergency routes.
Thank you, Mayor.
And I'm sorry, that information, we constantly put that out on the website. If you go on the main page, you'll actually see snow emergency. And then under Public Works, the information about clearing your sidewalks, all of those things are in there as well. And then we, as you're well aware, we tweet them out and put them on Facebook and everything else. So,
Great.
thank you, Audrey.
Anything else?
In addition, if I could, President Ricks, I wanted to add that we also have a media line for residents who perhaps are not near a television or have internet access. That number is 240-294-1307, and that's a number that they can call for updates on snow emergency information and other events, big events that happen in the city.
Thank you very much. Anything?
Mr. President, if I could just say, I think that's important because I know the mayor can attest to it, and I'm sure some of our other department heads can attest to phone calls that come in, particularly during heavy snowstorms, asking when is their street going to be plowed, and all those kinds of questions that pour in. So, publicizing that number is definitely good.
Also,
The number for the Laurel Media and Public Information line is 240-294-1307.
well, I was going to say, while we're talking about snow, I was going to make some comments at the end, but we're talking about it now. The Mr. Fleming and us staff met internally. It looks like starting around 7 a.m. tomorrow morning, they'll do a partial opening of the EOC. As far as we're concerned right now, city government will be open. If that changes, you'll look on our website, it'll be put out there. But when we open the EOC up, general public can dial our 725-5300 number and they'll get a human voice and be able to tell them or to assist them. That's one thing we do when the EOC's opened up. That could very well change depending on what time the snow starts arriving, but we're planning right now at 7 a.m. to have a partial opening.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none. Thank you, Rob. Moving on to item number 6, a consideration of agreement between the City of Laurel and the Signal Outdoor Advertising LLC for bus shelters in the city. Mr. Fleming. If you want to sit and do that, that's fine with me.
Oh, I'm good. I need the exercise. Thank you, Mr. President. As you're no doubt aware, most, if not all, of the bus shelters in the city are under a profit-sharing arrangement agreement with the owner of the shelters and the city, wherein we allow the shelters to be installed in the public rights-of-way. They're allowed to post advertising, and at present, we share in 10% of the proceeds of the profits for the advertising revenues that are generated. The current vendor, Culver Amherst, the contract expires in April. Through the Office of the Mayor, we have been dealing with Signal Outdoor Advertising, having discussions with them on setting up an agreement with them for a similar arrangement. There are some slight changes, and Kevin, I don't know if you can see it, but what's on the display right now, that is all of the current bus shelter locations and bus stops. Is that the one that's up there, Kevin? Bus shelter. That's just the shelters? Okay. We've included with your package that information as well as the next slide, Kevin. That is the bus shelters along with all of the bus stops. And provided this map for your information because we will be looking at some of the bus stops without shelters as we continue with this agreement to try and make arrangements for additional shelters to be placed. The next slide, Kevin, if you will. The shelters that are out there are somewhat dated in the architecture or the style, if you will. This particular shelter here is what is being proposed. It's somewhat contemporary, so it's being provided for most of the city of Laurel. If you can advance the next slide, Kevin. We have additional styles that will be used in the Historic District Commission or the Historic District areas of the city. We have had discussions with the city's Historic District Commission on shelters of this type. In looking at this shelter, this is very similar to the style shelter that the Historic District Commission has looked at. Now, they have not provided final approval on the shelter itself, but this particular style met with favor as far as their input in our selection process. Having said all that, as I mentioned earlier, the terms of the profit sharing under our current contract is 10%. In our negotiations with the vendor, we will be looking for a profit sharing of 15%. So we're looking to increase that by 5%. As I mentioned earlier, we are looking to possibly install additional shelters. Some of the issues that hinder us in that is that not all of the shelter locations are on city rights-of-way. In fact, a great deal of them are on state highway rights-of-way as well as some on Prince George's County's rights-of-way. So we'll be dealing with the contractor as well as both of those agencies to try and expand the number of shelters that we have in the city. Under the agreement that you were provided, the number of shelters is listed at 16. I believe the number is more accurate at 14. As you may also be aware, over the term of our current contract, there's been issues with maintenance and upkeep of the existing shelters. The language that we have drafted in the current agreement is a little more stronger than the agreement that we've had with Culver Amherst. It is our desire to make sure and follow up with them to make sure that these structures are maintained properly, as well as the removal of trash. And we are making provisions for the removal of snow. As you are no doubt aware, the location of the shelters being right next to the curb of most of our streets, when the plow goes through there, we inundate the shelters. So we're going to be looking at arrangements to have snow and ice removed from shelters that accumulate either from falling from the sky or from being placed there by plowing activities. One of our other concerns is graffiti. The city, I am proud to say that the city has a very aggressive graffiti abatement policy, and we are going to be employing that policy in this contract to make sure that any graffiti, any vandalism that occurs is taken care of within a 12-hour period, or not to exceed absolutely 24 hours. As with all of our contracts, there are liabilities involved. We are looking for the vendor to hold the city harmless in as much as possible. We are requiring indemnification insurance, and we are also requiring workers' compensation insurance for the vendor's employees, as well as the subcontractors that are used to install the shelters themselves. And as always, in our contracts, we require an equal opportunity statement, which will be included in this agreement. Having said all that, I'll take any questions you may have.
Want to add anything, Mayor? Okay, Mr. Letts. Mr. Letts.
I've seen some shelters recently. Over the last couple of years of my travels, I don't travel much anymore, but when I was traveling, they appear to have a solar panel on the top with some very tough lighting inside. So very low level lighting, but it's enough where you could see somebody's face if they were standing in there at night. Have we talked to the vendor about that, Marty?
We have. I didn't mention that because our preference, obviously, is to be as economical as possible and to favor any method that ensures the safety of our environment. So solar panels are being considered, but there are some locations where the crown of the trees will not favor solar locations, so we're not ruling out a request to BGE to install electric line and meter to the facility. Now, having said that, that's very expensive. The vendor that we have been talking to is somewhat committed to the solar panels, but we have not finalized that yet, and is somewhat reluctant to commit to a power line with a meter because of the expensive installation. If we can work it out where the their profit margin is still maintained somewhat, then that's certainly a consideration. But we are definitely looking to provide lighting for all of the shelters if possible, if humanly possible. But at this point in time, I can't guarantee that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President.
Ms. Query, follow up.
On the, I noticed, I think it was page 3, they were talking about the cleaning and allowing of the posters and pamphlets. Probably just a comment on that. Anytime you involve pamphlets in a bus shelter, I see garbage flying all around. What's been their experience, and do they even put pamphlets out?
Well, what we have maintained over the years is a work sharing agreement, if you will, where the mayor has made arrangements with our Parks and Recreation Department when they go around on weekends to look at the shelters, to empty the trash, and police around the area if necessary. The contract requires them to do that, but when you're talking about pamphlets, handouts, I'm sure you've seen the multicolored boxes that are put out. Bus shelters usually attract those, so it's inevitable that we're going to have an issue, but we will do our level best, both in-house and with the vendor, to get those areas cleaned up as soon as humanly possible. So it's a sore point with me, especially since I'm a past public works director, and it concerns Rob Free to no end, and obviously Mike, because Mike Losky is the one who's putting up the cost for his staff to go out and do maintenance on these. So we're working on it.
Thank you. The other question, it was, if I'm reading that right, the width of some of these new shelters, looks like they'll fit on the wider sidewalks, but are they gonna propose two types of new shelters? Because they won't fit in the older section of town on the rights of way, it looks like.
The size of the shelters that we have looked at are anywhere from 11 to 13 feet wide. They can be adjusted to accommodate practically any space. The issue here is somewhat governed by the size of the ad or the advertising panel that will be incorporated into this. Obviously, they need something that's going to enable traffic, people in vehicles, to be able to see the signs as they go by. So I'm fairly confident that we can work out any issues that relate to size constraints.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Nicholas.
My question was, you had mentioned lighting. For the summer months with the high temperatures, would that be modified or?
Modified it.
Inside, because, so it's not like a heat lamp.
Oh, no, these will be light emitting diodes, LEDs. They very low heat generation.
Okay.
Mr. Smalls.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd just like to add to Councilman Les's questions about the lighting. I certainly think from a safety standpoint, it would be advantageous where possible and practical to have lighting. Marty, as part of the installation, does that include trash receptacles? I would presume that the city would take care of emptying them.
It does.
But it does include
there are
trash
provisions for
receptacles.
trash receptacles. We have, in some cases, supplemented them with larger decorative trash receptacles where we have a constant issue with the smaller cans that they provide overflowing. So as we go through this process, we'll be monitoring that to determine whether the size of the can provided by the vendor is adequate or not.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Fleming, hearing what you've said about this agreement, do you think we'll be ready for the first reading on the 9th?
I believe so. We spent the day with legal reviewing this today. I have fired off a copy to the mayor. I'm asking him to finalize it, and then this will be sent off to the vendor for their input. And if there is a fly in the ointment, that would be it. How soon they can turn it around for us to be able to act on it.
Well,
one other thing, in speaking with Mr. Shea, a resolution will be required for the council to authorize the mayor to enter into this agreement. So you'll be seeing that shortly as well.
Well, again, don't feel pressured. I mean, I know we want to get this done, but if you don't, we can certainly move it to whatever next council meeting is.
I'm fairly certain we'll be able to
Okay.
work this out.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Let me make a couple comments
Good.
real quick.
feel the pressure. We want to get it done.
Absolutely.
We need to move and get this done before April the 19th, which is why I asked Marty to make sure he gave a briefing. If you all will at least look at what he's got, make any comments, send it to Christie, through Christie, and we'll get it to Marty. They're not going to, I can assure you, they're not going to agree with everything that we have added on here. So we'll need to move quickly. If not, we have to go to a monthly with them, and I just don't really want to do that. I'd rather get the contract squared away and put away. A couple things with Ms. Curry talked about and others. All of these have to be ADA accessible, so that comes into play. The lighting, if you look at the shelters that are out there now, they are ready for lighting. What happened was, and I did a shelter program where I work for years, BG&E kind of changed the game, required everything to be metered. It's roughly about $10,000, at that time it was about $10,000 to meter it, and all of them got away from the lighting. They want the lighting because they want the advertising. They can get more advertising. That commitment or understanding of what the shelters were all about. Years ago when we did this, we understood the different types of advertising that could and could not be there, as well as it could have been lit. We're still taking that to the next level with them. We'd like to add some shelters, but most importantly, for us, it really, we get a few dollars off the advertising, depending on what the percentage is. But the most important thing with the shelters for us, and I think mayor and council at that time and this council, has always been the safety of the individuals riding public transportation. And there are areas that we talk to them that need probably 2 shelters because it takes a lot of room up. They also do other things. They do trash receptacles, recycling. They also do different chairs and things like that out in the area. So I think we're not too far away from an agreement. I think even when they respond back to us, there'll be a couple things maybe on the percentages and things, but we'll work it out and negotiate. But we want to get this as close to or quickly as to you all as possible. So please take a look at it and provide us any feedback or information you may have. So,
Go ahead and do the first reading on the 9th and work from there. Okay, any other questions from the council? Then we'll go to item number 7, draft ordinance to amend chapter 17, traffic of the Code of the City of Laurel, 17-3, installation of traffic control devices. Chapter 1739, handicap parking zone, 1740, bus stop zone, 1776, designation of snow emergency streets. 17-137, stop and yield intersections, to authorize the public director of public works rather than the city council to make determinations regarding the installation and removal of stop signs, yield signs, no left turn signs, no left turn signs, no left turn sign 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. and signs, no U-turn signs, school zone signs, bus stop signs, no parking signs, and the speed limit signs, to designate no parking areas, snow emergency routes, and the location of handicap parking spaces on city streets, and other non-substantive changes generally relating to traffic regulations in the city. Right now, as you all remember, this all used to have to come to us, and then we would have an ordinance, and now it's going to be turned over to Mr. Freeh. Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. President. Basically, as you just mentioned, the signs that were identified in the title of this ordinance have to come before the mayor and council for approval. What we're looking to do is to streamline the process, make the effort less cumbersome on public works, and to provide for expeditious installation of signs where they're necessary. The Manual and Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which is a document that was adopted by this body back in the late 80s, stipulates that the signage that is basically covered under this title be installed based on sound engineering, traffic engineering practices. I can assure you that the Department of Public Works in the past, now, and in the future will not be placing signs willy-nilly. They'll always be backed up by sound engineering judgment based on a study. So we're looking to remove the burden from Public Works as far as having to have every stop sign approved by the mayor and city council, and put that responsibility back with the Public Works Department. And we understand that that's taken some of the authority of the city council, but we're looking under this proposal to have the Public Works Department provide either a biannual or an annual report to the council on activities based on the installation or removal of signs for your comment. So we ask for your consideration in this, and I'll take any questions you may have.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Smalls?
My question is regarding determination of where signs are placed. What I'm getting at is where the authority lies in making a determination. For example, let's use, I think it's 7th and Talbot. Years ago, we had, some public safety issues, a couple of accidents, et cetera. If any one of us, any citizen, brings something to any elected official and the elected official decides that would support that there's a need to have some kind of traffic control signage placed in a particular area, does the council then still have some reasonable, the mayor's got it, okay, he knows where I'm going, any reasonable authority input to approving that?
I mean, absolutely. I would answer that question. Correct me if I'm wrong. When Montgomery Street was, when they put stop signs at all those intersections,
Right.
which a lady grabbed me in the store the other day and was griping about again, the warrants
We're not met.
were not met.
Uh-huh.
But the council, mayor and council at that time, felt that it was needed. And that's what they did. And probably, I remember, I think it was on the public safety, there was a lot of discussion. I think when I was on the council, when we changed over and allowed stop signs to be placed by the public works director, when I was sitting in the council, I had problems doing a four-way stop, and that has to come back to the mayor and city council.
Yeah, any installation of 3 or more stop signs has to come back to the
Right.
council.
So-
what we call a multi-way stop.
So that was kept in there. And again, what I told Mr. Fleming was, get it to you all. Let's have the input.
Okay.
I understand this does take some responsibility away, but if it's abused, a mayor and a council can, simply legislate. The difference here, I think, also in the council's wisdom is we've hired a city engineer, which we never really
Had before.
before. So I hope that answers your question. It was really mainly to make sure we get some discussion here.
Okay.
Thank you.
If I could expand on that further, the authors of the manual on uniform traffic control devices that we subscribe to, they understand that there are different situations all across the country. So there is latitude in there for discretion to be used, not only by the traffic engineers employed by the city, but also by the council. So we're certainly not looking to...
Just one other thing. I know the attorney won't like to hear this, but every time you do this requires the attorney to draft an ordinance, come before the council. So again, there is a possibility of saving some dollars as well. Sorry. Sorry, John.
Ms. Nicholas? Okay, Ms. Crary?
Traffic lights, that would be under this?
Not specifically, no. Traffic lights are still under the manual on uniform traffic control devices. There are very stringent requirements, warrants that have to be met for the installation of traffic signal. But certainly, the local governing body has input into the installation of traffic lights. We would come before you and basically make you aware that there are serious liability issues if a traffic signal is installed that does not meet warrants, but there are some circumstances where a traffic signal can be installed and not meet warrants. Very few circumstances, but are some.
Mr. Liz.
Yeah, let me just, okay.
Could I finish?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. So,
They wanted to jump over
is
you.
is that going to come before us? I'm reading here that it looks like it's going away. It's not only stop signs.
Well, it would come for you for two reasons. One, for your input on the installation itself, and also for the contract to award, because you're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of $200,000 a signal.
Right, that was my concern. Thank you. Go ahead.
You sure?
Yeah.
Marty said
I apologize.
Marty said you can have the $200,000. You taking that one?
Mr. Les.
Yeah, let me, the problem with warrants contained in this book, the problem goes back 35 years. They don't change the book often enough. Okay, so you end up with the book. I don't know what the current version of the book is, but at one time it was like 12 years old. And when Kim called down there to ask when are you going to release the new version, we're working on it.
Of the MUTCD?
Yes. Yes.
I believe there's a 2010 or 2011.
Well, I don't know what the version is now. I'm talking, this is years ago, Marty.
Oh,
Okay, so now let me come to the way I read this. The way I read it right now, and there is some latitude in there, but there isn't a whole bunch when you talk about warrants, because it's the issue of liability. You put something in, somebody gets killed and, gets hurt real bad, and you didn't have the warrants. The way I read this is that the Director of Public Works, or his designee, I assume by the designee we mean the engineer we have. I don't know, but. let's just-
Engineer or acting public works director.
Yeah, I understand, okay. They make a decision. It didn't meet the absolute requirements of the warrants. They become personally liable, I believe, in that position. I'm not an attorney, and I'll let the attorneys think about that.
They're
When
actually
this count-
covered by
when
our
this-
professional liability.
Yeah, but when the council makes decisions, it's hard to sue us individually, they sue the city. Okay, but I just want to make sure that we're not setting something up that could adversely impact an employee, whether it's Rob or somebody else in the future, that's all. And again, this book, it doesn't get changed often enough. Like I say, I remember,
I share your concerns, and we
Yeah, I
will
get it.
make sure
When it
that,
is.
that we're adequately
Well-
protected.
It's
Kim-
25 years.
Kim, wasn't it, remember we called down there that time? And it was 10 years or 11 years old, and they were working on the change. Because we talked about the changing way that people move across our roads, and that should impact warrants.
Well, in my experience with the MUTCD, they'll publish one at least every 5 years, and then they'll do supplements. That's all you
Alright.
get is supplements. And
Yeah, I understand.
so you have the original published book,
Right.
and then you have a notebook that
Right,
is attached
right.
to it that has the supplements in it. But they are now producing it, I don't want to say fast and furious, but
Okay. Faster.
faster, absolutely.
Okay. But I just want to make sure that we're not setting up a city employee on the liability side. And since our attorney's sitting here, he's going to think about that overnight.
No, I mean, I think I can answer it now. I mean, if a city employee is acting within the scope of his employment, his or her employment, and as long as they're not acting with some sort of malice.
No, I understand, but if they make a
Not to be
discretionary
personal
call,
about it.
John, if they make a discretionary call because there's some latitude in there, does any liability accrues to them in that
I do
situation?
not believe so.
Okay, all right. Well, if you just take a look at that.
I'll take a look at that. but
Appreciate that, thanks.
As a general rule, no.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Certainly, coming from the old school here, when I served as chairman of the Public Safety Committee and we did not have an engineer and we kind of flew by the seat of our pants on a lot of things, used compasses and protractors and all this other kind of stuff. But I think that with the engineer there, she certainly has really brought a lot of help to us in answering questions and doing things. So with that in mind, between Mr. Free and Christy Fang, I think that certainly I feel comfortable and making this change and allowing them to have that kind of authority. Any other questions from the council? Yes, ma'am.
Public safety. I thought you were gonna ask about your public safety group.
You thought I was going to ask you about?
The public safety organization, they would simply refer questions. When a citizen's question comes up to Mr. Faree?
Under the proper circumstances, this situations that are covered under this proposed ordinance would be flushed through the Public Safety Committee for their input.
And as part of what Mayor Mo was talking about with these stop signs on Main Street, the Public Safety Committee meeting on Montgomery, 7th and Montgomery to be precise, the Public Safety Committee on the March 19th agenda is going to take up and look at that intersection and see what we can do to facilitate some of the traffic in the area and try to keep it from jumping to side streets and creating other bottlenecks that are creating problems. So I look forward to having that meeting. Anything else from the mayor?
Thank you all. And we just ask, we're in no rush here. We just ask that you take a look at it, provide any input and information. Hopefully you feel comfortable with it and there's enough check and balances in there. If not, we'll try to do so. I do think, the issue that Public Works or others deal with when we have something that needs to be either a stop sign or no parking, whatever the case may be. The only other way around it is for the mayor can do an emergency and do it that way. So there's a lot of, I think there's some opportunity here, but as I said, we're not in a rush and we just ask you all to take a look at it and let us know. And when you're ready, we'll put it on for first reading. So just again, send that information to Ms. Mills.
Thank you, Mayor. And this will be up for a conversation and possible action or reading, if you will, on our meeting of March the 9th. So anything else to come before the council? You go.
Mr. President, we have been talking internally, the administration regarding some type of moratorium, whether that would be building, whether that would be zoning, whatever the case may be. We have to update our master plan. We have to update our, I call it 1141, which is the growth. Did I get that right? The growth boundaries. And it takes a lot of staff time. It takes a lot of work amongst everybody, including the council. We have to appoint a working group of citizens as well, because this is, when we do the master plan, it'll be a full review when we do that. So we're still, in my case, still struggling with how I want to pursue this, because there are some things in the pipeline that we want to make sure and don't hold up. But there are things that constantly keep coming to the zoning department, and it's just not, somewhere along the line we're going to have to do something, and we're not there yet to make that proposal. But I didn't want to catch anybody off guard. We are talking internally about it, and we may end up having something come to you, because as I just said, the master plan is definite, and the growth boundaries we have to do by law. And from the master plan comes the sectional map amendment. Am I forgetting anything else, Jack, on that, or all of those? So, and it takes a lot of time, and I just don't think we can put that kind of work on the staff in the back and do what's fair to the individual that's coming before the mayor and council or city government. So, answer any questions you have. Other than that, thank you.
Any questions? We are adjourned.